Okay, we're back with session 2 for June 16th. So I'm going to read the article and hopefully you have it printed out in front of you. I had said earlier that I was going to do a higher level, and I've settled on kind of a medium high. I'm going to use the 860 Lexile level, but I will also send you the 1050 Lexile level. There's one that's even above that is available for this article if you wish to really challenge yourself. As we read and stop to discuss, we'll be thinking about these items. Why do people want to defund the police? Where's that coming from, and why is it looked at as a possible solution to some problems? How would that be done? It sounds complicated to me. Let's see what the article says. And then beyond cities, question mark. Is it going beyond the big cities where the big problems seem to be happening? New York and Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Washington. Certainly there are protests and rioting and looting in other cities, but what about smaller cities in general and towns? What about those places? And then just in general, what are the pros and the cons to such a decision? And what do you think about this based on your past experience in your own societies of origin, where you have seen maybe a somewhat different system than we have here, and how you feel about it in light of what you have come to understand and appreciate or dislike about how the police system works here in America, whether it has served you well or not, just kind of how you feel about some of these. The article, I just hit myself in the jaw, looks like this, and one of the things that you see right off is that very large painting of letters in the street, and this is actually in Washington, D.C., right on one of the major roads, 16th Street in Washington, D.C. It says defund the police. There is another place, I don't know if it's on the same road as this in D.C., where the same thing was done, Black Lives Matter, in very, very large letters. You may be aware that the mayor of Washington, D.C. is very much at odds with our president, and they have not a very good relationship, and she is definitely pushing the idea of defunding police. She's also quite an activist for the Black Lives Matter movement. So she has ordered these street signs, so to speak, right in Washington, D.C., and right in the area where the president would travel and be aware of them. Right. And I shall begin reading. Please read with me. There has been a recent movement to cut funding for police departments. Some people think they should be broken up entirely. This movement comes after the death of George Floyd. Now, broken up in this case would be to completely disassemble the police departments, okay? So defunding and breaking up are two different things. And some people want to completely disassemble the system as it is and redesign it from the bottom up, okay? Starting all over. George Floyd was a black man killed by a white police officer on May 25th. It happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His death led to large protests across the country because people are angry and hurt. They feel that police unfairly target the black community. Now activists, local leaders, and officials are demanding changes to policing. They say police departments should either receive less money from cities or should be broken up entirely. Demonstrators have chanted, "Defund the police," at rallies. They have printed these words on face masks. In the District of Columbia, "Defund the police" is painted in huge yellow letters on Black Lives Matter Plaza near the White House. Liberal activists and academics have supported this idea for a long time. Politicians across the country are now seriously considering it. They are looking at ways to scale back their police departments. Now, scale back would be to sort of make smaller, okay, to lessen the responsibilities of these police departments. The money would instead be redirected to social programs to help people. Okay, so we see here that the words liberal activists are used to describe the people maybe who are primarily in favor of making some kind of change. Also, it says academics, and a lot of times that's just kind of a word for a lot of your college professor types, researchers who research law and order matters, sociology matters, that sort of thing. And you know, there are always within a group, if you might be considered a more liberal-minded person, even within that group, you could be farther to the left or farther to the right, just because you are, you know, more in a liberal mindset, or perhaps you are a member of the Democratic Party. Doesn't mean that you are crazy liberal, okay? It may mean that you have just a more open kind of perspective sometimes about different ideas, and you know, there are extremes within that. If you are a more conservative thinker, again, you could be on a very far extreme that is very closed to new ideas, or you could be, you know, more in the middle. So I'm not huge on labels. I think I've told you guys that before. I think labels sometimes get in the way. I think it's more about taking situations and looking at each situation, or if it's candidates or whatever it might be, but doing those things thoughtfully, situation by situation, and working together with one another to find the best solution, not the most political solution, not the one that makes the politicians happy or puts them into office or gets them out of office, but what's best for people. So there's this kind of thought about, okay, one group saying, well, actually there's three groups, okay? There's a group that says leave it as it is, a group that says scale it down, scale it back, make the police departments, the responsibilities and so forth smaller, so it's more controlled, and that the training is more specific. And then there's a group that says no, let's do away with everything the way it is and start over. Let's see what happens from here. On June the 7th, 9 members of the Minneapolis City Council made an announcement. They are planning to take apart the city's police department. Now, Minneapolis is a big city, so this is quite an interesting step. Spending money on community programs instead. Congress is also facing pressure. On June 9th, Democrats proposed changes to the law. The changes are aimed at restraining police use of excessive force. Supporters of police defunding say changing the rules is not enough. They argue it has not worked in the past. They say leaders must reduce cities' dependence on officers. They want the money that used to be spent on law enforcement to go back to Black communities. The money should be used for services such as schools, healthcare, and housing, they say. All right, so many constituents, many citizens have spoken to their congresspeople and have said, we want to push for some changes in the law that have to do with the amount of force that police can legally use. That there are too many police who are exceeding the force that is necessary to deal with a particular criminal, and that we need to give stronger boundaries and hold them legally responsible for going beyond those boundaries. Some who are in favor of defunding feel like that the defunding part is necessary because just changing laws hasn't fixed this issue of excessive force. And the argument is, getting to our question of why, the argument is that that the police have too many responsibilities right now. They're being called out for all sorts of matters that sometimes would not require policing so much as it would possibly be more suited to a social worker, a counselor, a medical expert, but not always the police. And sometimes when the police get involved, the feeling is that makes people angry. It changes the situation from being one that is going to be managed through conversation and counsel into one that has become more of a matter of force and anger and this kind of thing. So it puts people, they feel like sometimes the police presence puts people more in a situation of being agitated and wanting to argue and fight against, and then the police, of course, take greater control, and that's when we have possible shootings and so forth. They'd like for the money that is not used, that has been taken away, some of those funds that have been taken away, then to be spent in Black communities to work with people through community services, to give more money for for services to help the schools, to be stronger schools, more teachers, more counselors, that sort of thing, to help bring in more health care, substance abuse, social workers, these kinds of things within those communities to help to take care of things before they become big problems. All right, so that is kind of the idea that people have about, why defunding and reallocating. Reallocate means to place in a different, put in a different place, okay? So reallocating funds means moving funds to different places to be used in a different way. All right, continuing on. Alicia Garza helped found Black Lives Matter, an organization that campaigns against violence and systemic racism toward Black people. Systemic racism means it's very much within the system, very deeply in the system, and historically in the system. When we talk about defunding the police, what we are saying is invest in the resources that our communities need, Garza said. All right, so that's just what I was describing, is community resources that will help people. Alex Vital studies social problems. He wrote a book about policing in which he argues that policing has expanded in the past 40 years. It is no longer just a tool to fight crime. Police now respond to homelessness, mental illness, and youth violence. The goal of reducing law enforcement is not to suddenly get rid of all police, he said. Rather, the goal is to change the role of police in society, he said. All right, so when we talk about the why and the how, these are the kinds of ideas that we hear, is not doing away with, but reallocating, looking at providing more resources and giving the police a different identity. Instead of the person who is called, when a homeless person is in the doorway of an apartment building, instead of calling the police, then you're calling a social worker who is available at all hours for these kinds of situations, and who might still have police backup, but would be the primary person to address the problem. And I'm sorry, I didn't finish that section. There was one other line there. Some U.S. and local law enforcement leaders have criticized the idea. Okay, so we know that not everyone agrees to the why and the how, right? Making changes to police departments. Attorney General William Barr, now this is at the federal level, is the top legal advisor to the Trump administration. He said he believes the U.S. police system is not racist. He said he understands why Black Americans do not trust officers given the history of this country. Peter Newsham is the police chief of Washington, D.C. He warned lawmakers to be careful. He said cutting funding could add to police brutality. He said defunding a police agency could affect an officer's training. All right, now this is interesting because remember I said just a few minutes ago that the mayor of Washington, D.C. very much is pushing for defunding the police. But the police chief in Washington, D.C. does not think it is a good idea. He thinks that it would actually damage the funding needed to train police officers, and he said that he thinks it could add to police brutality. I'm not sure what he means here, but I suspect that what he's saying is if police don't feel that they are given adequate respect with training, then they may use greater force just because they feel disrespected in some way. So another viewpoint and an interesting way of looking at it as well. I see I need to stop and go to the next video. Just one moment, please.